Let's talk Vikings today with Star Tribune writer Ben Goessling. It's been a busy week, Ben. I want to get into everything we know in just a minute. But there's one thing we still don't know yet. But first, it's one thing we still don't know yet. The Vikings have seemingly constructed a very intentional bridge to JJ McCarthy, where it looks like now they are ready to hand things over to the second-year quarterback. However, Ben, are they still intrigued by doing a little bit of their own research on how to complete this plan? Is there anything to this Aaron Rodgers smoke that we've been kind of gathering this week?
I would say there is at least enough intrigue to not close the door on it. Everybody that I've talked to about it is not willing to say there's no chance of it happening. And the hedge is, what does Rodgers want to do? Does he want to come somewhere where he's not the long-term? I mean, he can't be anybody's long-term solution at this point, but what does this mean for competition? I don't think he's going somewhere where he has to compete for a job at all. And I don't know what promises the Vikings would make him, but I will say this. What I know is there is enough willingness to talk about this in from an organizational level for the Vikings that nobody is closing the door to this happening. It's the question always with Aaron Rodgers of, is the juice worth the squeeze? And there's a fair amount of squeeze at this point with Aaron Rodgers, where you got to put up with whatever he's going to say on Pat McAfee, whatever he feels about the offseason program in terms of how much he's going to be there, how involved he's going to be, how he's going to relate to his receivers. I think all of that would be a question. Does Justin Jefferson want to play with him? I mean, maybe Justin Jefferson would be very intrigued by it, but then there's the other part of it where 4 MVPs played the position at as high of a level in every sense of the word: mobility, accuracy, arm talent, downfield arm, capabilities, the hard counts, the catching people with 12 on the field, all of that kind of stuff. Nobody has done this at this high of a level, with the possible exception, I think, of Patrick Mahomes. So there's a lot to like if you're getting that version of Aaron Rodgers. And I think the question is, would they? And how long would he want it? How long would they want to be committed to him? If it's a year, I think you can make that argument. If it's longer than that, is JJ McCarthy going to start to say, you know what, I'm not terribly crazy about where this is lining up? So there's a lot to figure out with this. But from my understanding, he is fond of what they've done. He's fond of how Kevin O'Connell goes about things. He certainly sees the amount of talent here. I think all of those things are real. And I think they are saying, you know what, if we could make it work, let's at least talk about it. I don't know that it's going to happen. I think Pittsburgh still makes more sense, but nobody has slammed the door on this. So it's worth watching, at least for now, and maybe for a while, because Aaron Rodgers may take some time before he emerges from the darkness, so to speak, on this and makes a decision.
Yeah, and they could slam the door. They could easily say, no, we're not interested, move on. So that's telling that they haven't done that publicly or privately. The bigger, one question for me is, here's a guy who's going to turn 42 during this season. This is not, Favre came here and had a very good year. That was his age. He turned 40 in the middle of that season. 40 and 42 aren't terribly far apart, but there's still a certain gap there. And also,
I'm 11 months older than him. I am very aware of how quick it changes.
That's very true. And you look at this too, is like Aaron Rodgers' last 3 seasons haven't been good. His last year in Green Bay was not very good. Then he had the torn Achilles year in New York, and then his last year in New York, like statistically, it came out okay, but if you look at his QBR, it was way down. Like he's not the same quarterback that you remember, and he's pretty far removed from that now. The last time he was elite, which again, his elite was extremely elite because he won back-to-back MVPs, but the last time he was elite was 2021, which was 4 years ago. That's a long time. So I'm wondering, like, not just is it worth it from the baggage standpoint or from the culture standpoint, but can this guy even still play? Is he still a better quarterback than J.J. McCarthy even?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the question, because we saw him play the Vikings in London last year, and there were moments in that game where it's like, okay, that's still Aaron Rodgers. He's had some throws in that game where it's like, yep, that's the guy we've seen for years. But the thing that's changed, at least by my lights, is it's not as frequent as it was. There's still those moments, but it's not all of the time where he's making those things happen. He's not as mobile. The extending plays and throwing darts on those post routes that he used to hit to Jordy Nelson and Devontae Adams all the time, that's not quite the same. And he is, I don't think, quite as able to just get away from pressure. I mean, he's like a lot of these quarterbacks. I think everybody talks about this. You saw it with Favre. I think you saw, Tom Brady was pretty good at avoiding it. But if you play the game a certain way, you expose yourself to more hits. And over the years, older quarterbacks don't like getting hit as much because it hurts and you just don't recover from those things as quickly. So I think a lot of that is a valid question. Is he going to be better than J.J. McCarthy by enough to say all that comes with it, whatever message it might send to J.J. McCarthy, whatever message it might send about where they are going, is all of that worth it? And then the other thing you have to ask, though, is what message do you want to send to your locker room? Because this is a team coming off a 14-win season. Do they feel good enough about McCarthy to turn it over to him? I think they're very excited about where he's at physically. I think they're very excited about his progress, but excited about progress and saying this guy can take the keys to a 14-win team and lead us to the Super Bowl in 2025 are different questions. So I think a lot of that stuff is why this is a complicated conversation, because they do have to figure out what are the trade-offs here. Who are we sort of which feathers are we ruffling if we do this? And is all of it going to be worth it? Because it is a big undertaking if you're going to do it. I think you go in with your eyes as open as they get. And, there's this idea I've heard a little bit of like, well, if he comes in here, he'll fit into the culture and he'll be kind of willing to work with what the Vikings have. It's like, maybe, but do we have a lot of experience or a lot of history to say that he kind of just goes along to get along? I don't think we do. I think, in fact, he's quite proud of being an enigma, was it? So, I don't think that just getting along with the program is something that he is particularly fond of doing. If he buys into it, that's one thing, but it's a little bit of, you got to sell me on it. So it would be a sell job from them on a lot of levels. And it would be very, very interesting to see how everybody manages that if, in fact, it did happen.
Selfishly, there would be a lot of downloads and clicks involved. I would appreciate that. I've written a lot about Aaron Rodgers over the years.
You have?
As a member of the Vikings, I'm kind of our foremost chronicler of that outside of the people who cover the Vikings. The one thing I do come back to, and I was always like this with Favre until he retired, until it was like 5 years retired. Like, is he coming back? I don't know. If you ask yourself point blank, what quarterback out there right now do you look at and say, man, if everything breaks right and he catches it just right, he could take you to a Super Bowl? I do say Aaron Rodgers, but that's probably the temptation, right? Like, you look at it and you say, if this guy is as good as he could be, or 80% or 90% of as good as he's ever been, he's probably the best quarterback out there.
That's true. I mean, that is the temptation. Is this does not have to work for 10 years or 5 or even 3. It has to work for 1. And they have enough pieces. There's
pieces are in place.
Pieces are in place. We'll go with it. There's enough of that they could probably talk themselves into it from that perspective. And, these owners lived this once before. They lived the high of it, and then they lived the, shall we say, deflating backside of it the next year when Favre came back for 2010. Everything went terribly. The Metrodome collapsed. Brad Childress got fired. Leslie Frazier took over. I mean, Kevin O'Connell would not be in that situation. No. Kevin O'Connell, I think, has a lot more equity built up at this point than Childress did. But, Childress got fired the year after an NFC title game run. So there is a lot of this stuff that you have to discuss with him. And hunches and your evaluations of him have to be right, because if they're not, there could be a major cost to doing it.